Hello and thank you for joining me on this short video, Health Marking. My name's Andy Bowles and I'm a food lawyer. Now, this is the 87th in a series of 100 short videos that I'm recording on UK food law topics. You may be watching this as part of our online training service, in which case you can have access to a whole range of additional resources, including you can download the presentation, and some of the little diagrams on this particular presentation are very small, so you'll be able to look at them. But if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, you are of course very welcome. Okay, so I'm talking about health marking. Now there are two types of marking that can be applied to foods, and I just want to deal with obviously one of them. There's health marking and identification marking. Now these marks are applied in approved establishments. If you're not familiar with approved establishments, then there's obviously a short video on those, but essentially where you've got wholesale supply of products of animal origin, then that activity requires approval from the appropriate authority. So we have health marking and identification marking. Identification marking is placed on products that are from approved establishments by the food business operator. So an identification mark you'll find on things like packs of cooked meats or packs of cheese or something like that. And it's put on by the food business operator, and it's part of the enhanced traceability for such foods. However, a health mark, which is what I'm talking about on this particular video, is very different. A health mark is applied to fresh meat carcasses only. So, in other words, in the UK, this means that the health mark is applied in approved slaughterhouses, approved cutting plants and approved game handling establishments. And these establishments are under the control in England, Wales and Northern Ireland by the Food Standards Agency, and in Scotland by Food Standards Scotland. So they're the authorities that will be applying the health mark in this occasion. So health marks are applied to fresh meat carcasses, and they're applied by meat inspectors after they have performed the appropriate veterinary inspection of the carcass prior to it being released for sale on the market. So just, if you're actually in an approved slaughterhouse, animals will be presented to slaughter, and they'll go through various ante-mortem checks, in other words checking that the animals are healthy and clean and all that sort of stuff. Once slaughter has occurred, then carcasses will be subject to post-mortem checks. This is undertaken by official veterinarians and meat inspectors, typically by meat inspectors working under the direction of official veterinarians. So they'll be looking for any evidence of disease, any evidence of, poor carcasses, to make sure the animals have been healthily and properly reared, that sort of thing. So there's a whole bunch of stuff they'll be looking at. If they're satisfied that the carcass that they're examining during post-mortem examination is satisfactory, in other words, it is fit for human consumption, then they will apply a health mark to that carcass. Now, the health mark is basically an oval, and it is applied, as I say, by the inspector, so as part of the official controls, as they call it. So it's very different from an identification mark, which is applied just by a food business operator. So you can see that the health mark basically is an oval, and it contains some details within it. It'll contain some letters and it'll contain some numbers. Then the number is the approval number of the relevant meat establishment that is applied to health marks. So it could be an approved slaughterhouse or approved meat cutting plant or approved game handling establishment. So when it's approved by the Food Standards Agency or Food Standards Scotland, it will be given a number, and that's the number it will appear here. The letter above it is the identifying country. So health marks are applied to fresh meat carcasses, but they're only applied to fresh meat carcasses of these animals. You'll notice that, for example, you don't get health marks on fresh poultry, but you do get health marks on cattle, including buffalo and bison, sheep, goats, pigs, horses, camelids, so that would include camels, and we don't get an awful lot of camels in the UK, but llamas, ratites, which is things like ostriches, farm deer, wild boar, large wild game, deer and wild boar. All of these if they're presented to a slaughterhouse, they go through official slaughter and the official controls, a health mark will be applied to them. Now, typically, when the mark is applied to a carcass on the line in the slaughterhouse, if you like, they'll typically only apply maybe one health mark to it, because one of the problems you have with health marking when you're stamping a fresh carcass is carcasses are often sort of wet, and when the carcass leaves the approved establishment, the actual mark must be legible. That's one of the key requirements of a health mark. So if a carcass is wet when they stamp it, it can drip and you get very much a blurred health mark. If that's the case, you will find that the health inspectors will maybe only put one mark on a carcass, but once it's moved to a fridge, once the carcass is dried, they'll apply maybe several more. The number of health marks that are applied to a carcass depends on how the carcass is going to be cut. I'll explain that in a moment. So there is a requirement for legibility, and with health marks there is a requirement for size. So you'll notice that the health mark is within an oval. The oval must be at least 6.5 centimetres wide and 4.5 centimetres high. The letters must be at least 0.8 centimetres high and figures at least 1 centimetre high. You can actually see smaller health marks or reduced sizing on lamb, kids and piglets because of the size of the animal. Now you'll notice in a number of the health marks I've displayed, you can see a GB in there, you can see a UK in there. That's the originating country. But of course, it's a bit complicated since the UK left the European Union, but because there are still some elements of the UK that have an access to the single market, and that's of course Northern Ireland. So this is very small behind me, I recognise that, but you can, if you are on our website, you'll be able to look at this in a bit more detail. But this is just different formats of the health mark that can be applied. Along the top it says where the product that's marked with the appropriate health mark can be marketed. So whether it can be marketed UK-wide, Great Britain only, Northern Ireland market, the EU or non-EU market. Obviously supply to the EU and to non-EU countries might be subject to approval of establishments and of course the UK to supply them. But so the first two we have on there, we have United Kingdom with Northern Ireland underneath, then the approval number, and underneath EC. We also have UK open bracket NI close bracket with the number and then EC. Those are Northern Ireland health marks. They can be applied to carcasses, and carcasses that bear those health marks can be traded within the EU. You've got the next one is GB and then just the approval number. So that's Great Britain. So yeah, subject to other approvals. Carcasses marked with GB with an approval number on there can again be marketed across Great Britain, Northern Ireland and the EU. If you've got Great Britain, then United Kingdom and then 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the approval number might be, then again that can be traded across the EU subject to other approvals. But lastly, if we have UK and then the approval number, then that is restricted to pretty much the Great Britain and non-EU markets. So there's some subtle differences in those health marks. One of the subtle differences you'll see is in Northern Ireland it bears the letters EC. The letters EC are not permitted to be on health marks originating from fresh meat that's been slaughtered in the UK since the 1st of January 2024. Okay, so the health mark is applied in the slaughterhouse or the game handling establishment at the time of post-mortem inspection. It is a demonstration that the carcass is fit for human consumption. I said that they will apply several health marks, but it does depend on how the meat is cut, and typically the inspectors will be advised by the food business operator running the slaughterhouse how the meat is going to be cut, so they'll know how many to put on it. So basically, depending on the cut, if the carcasses are cut into half or quarters, or half cut carcasses are cut into 3 parts, then a health mark needs to be applied in each. So if it's only going to be cut in half, there'll be 1 health mark on either half. If it's going to be cut into half and then into 3 parts, you'll find 3 health marks on each side. That's how it works. The health mark should be present clearly when the fresh meat is now placed on the wholesale market. Okay, so there we are. That's just a brief word about health marking. That's just one out of 100 short videos that I'm producing. So please join me on one of the 99 other ones. Thanks very much for watching. Cheers.